Hey everyone, it's your buddy, it's your pal, it's Karnak. Star Wars Armada explained. Appreciate y'all's patience as I worked to get the ignition video out, largely just because I wanted to make sure I was getting all the details done, and then I was going to do it yesterday. I just was so deathly ill. I'm mostly better now. Let's get started. Let's jump right in on ignition. How does ignition work? There's a lot of confusion. I'm not going to cover like every single tiny minute detail of like, well, does this card work? Does this card work? And it's just like I'll cover pretty much the common questions, and then if there's anything that needs to be brought up in terms of like interaction that is niche or unique that most people won't catch, I'll make sure to cover it. But I'm not going to cover like, does this crit upgrade work? Does this crit upgrade work? It's like, yes, crits still work. There's no change. Again, we'll dive right in. We're going to cover ignition. I've got the nice little super laser up there in the corner. So yeah, this is definitely not going to be a short video, but I'll try to get through it as quickly as I can. So here we've got the onager. I have two out for the purposes of demonstrating something. We got the one on the left is going to be using red. One on the right is going to be using blue. And just for the purpose of this video, we'll be using the test bed variant, which has the 4 red dice and the 3 black dice in its special ignition arc. But how do you know if that's part of the special ignition arc? Well, let's jump right in reading from the handy dandy rulebook. There's a lot here. So as I go through it, I'll try to pick out some of the time. But yeah. So one thing that we need to understand, it will say in the ignition as I read it, but there's a new range introduced with this. Because on Armada, we had close range, medium range, and long range. And if anything wasn't in those 3 ranges, it didn't matter. Now we have extreme range. Extreme range is any range greater than the length of the range ruler. And a range ruler, the full length of a range ruler, is 1 foot. So now we have a definition of what is beyond long range. It's extreme range. So if you take the 1 foot ruler, you plop it out. If it's beyond that, it's extreme range. Doesn't matter how far, but that goes out. Let me actually pull out I think there's a ruler. Here we go. Boom. So when you're measuring from the ship, if it's past the ruler here, that's extreme range. So we got close, medium, long, extreme. Extreme. Okay. So let's talk about the special battery armament, special firing arc. Some ships have a special battery armament indicated by dice icons in an additional shaded armament box not associated with a shield value, and 1 or more special firing arcs indicated by dashed lines and shaded areas on their ship tokens. So we have here the ship token, which is the cardboard, which I just found out recently the cardboard is actually called a token. It you might not think that that matters for something, but it actually does for some rulings. But anyway, so the cardboard is the ship token. We have the ship card here to the left. If you look at the ship card, you'll see kind of what's talking about in the middle there. You'll see kind of like the red going out into a red shaded box, showing that that's the ignition battery. And then in front of that, you'll see a smaller dice pool attached to a shield value. That is the normal front arc. So when you're looking at the ship token, you'll see the normal solid lines here that represents the firing arcs of the front arc. And then you'll see these dashed lines that represent the ignition arc. So some people definitely have been confused about, is the ignition arc its own arc? Does it block attacks for firing arcs? What does that all mean? How does this work? We're going to get into that. Let's keep reading. A ship's special battery armament and special firing arcs are used only when performing ignition attacks. A ship with a special battery armament has the ignition close keyword. So it starts with ignition close. What does that mean? Again, we'll get into it. Just going to read through this real quick. A ship's special battery armament is associated with each of its special firing arcs. Each special firing arc is associated with the hull zone it is located in. So I'm going to cover each of these in detail real quick. So again, as it says here, the special ignition dice pool, its firing arc is this dashed line. So it's not the front hull zone solid line. It's its own line here. But as it says, it is still associated with the front arc. Why does it make that distinction? Essentially, if you attack with your ignition attack, it's considered as having attacked with your front hull zone. Meaning, as most ships can only make 2 attacks. That's its one attack, out the front. It can't attack out the front again unless it has gunnery teams equipped, in which case it can attack from the front hull zone with the front arc battery armament, but you cannot make 2 ignition attacks. But why can't I make 2 ignition attacks? I really, really want to. Well, because the rules tell you that you can't. I definitely have seen players show up already and like, yeah, I've got gunnery team, so I'm just going to start blasting. It's like, no, that's not. Read the rule book. It says in here, and again, we'll get to it, but just real quick, pretty much once you make the ignition attack, you remove the token. So no, you don't get to make a double attack. I'm not going to pull that stuff off yet because it's going to remind me a couple other things. We're going to get to it. But again, just real quick to shorten that, when you make an ignition attack, it's considered an attack from your front hull zone, and it's the attack associated there. So you still, measure line of sight, regardless if it's a front hull attack or your special ignition attack from the yellow dot to yellow dot. But if it's the special ignition attack, you can only use the firing arcs that are dashed. If it's just a front hull zone attack, the firing arcs are your solid lines. Okay. Now, some people have making a note about the ship's special battery armament is associated with each of its special firing arcs. People are like, well, it's only got one. Why does it say that? Well, they're covering their bases for potential future upgrades or ships that maybe they'll have multiple ignition arcs. So that's why that is there. Because I know there's only the one ignition arc now, but it's not going to limit them for if they want a ship that has 2 or 3 different ones. That they didn't want to restrict themselves early on or have to make an updated ruling where they can just put it in just now. So again, it's just future-proofing that wording. Okay, let's move on to reading more. Ignition range keyword. So range is whatever the range for the ignition, which you can have multiple. We'll get into that. At the end of a ship's activation, if it has the ignition keyword, that ship may place the targeting token matching its ID token within its special firing arc and within the range specified by its ignition keyword. And make note of that. It's saying within the range, not at. Again, I'll show you what I mean. If a ship has multiple ignition keywords, such as those granted by upgrade cards, its targeting token may be placed within any of the specified ranges. At the beginning of a ship's attack step, if its targeting token is in play, that ship must perform an ignition attack against a ship in the special firing arc that its targeting token is within as its first attack during this activation, if able. At the end of a ship's attack step, after it performs an ignition attack, remove its targeting token. While performing an ignition attack, firing arc, range, and line of sight are measured from the attacker ship token as normal with the following exceptions. Ignition attacks can be declared against ships beyond the length of the range ruler, which is considered extreme range. Firing arc is measured using the attacker's special firing arc that the targeting token is within, instead of using that hull zone standard firing arc. Attack dice are gathered from the attacker's special battery armament based on the range measured from the attacker's targeting token to any part of the defender's ship token, even another hull zone, instead of the attack range. Some critical effects contain the ignition keyword as part of their header. These critical effects can only be resolved during the ignition attacks. Okay, I know it's a lot of reading, guys. What does it all mean? I'm going to try to break it down. All that simply, I just had to start with the bases, just reading through it. All right. So, before I go into any upgrade cards or cover anything like I mentioned before, let's just talk very basically how ignition works. So you've done deployment, move these off. You've placed your ship. You know, this guy has placed his ship here, and he's placed his ship here, and you've placed your onager here, we'll say. Okay. So not taking into account any upgrades or anything else. So you've done deployment. You've now gone through the first turn, and we're going to say, you know what, this rebel player is not very smart. He's not very scared. He's going to move ahead at speed 3 with this MC-75. And this rebel player also moved this Corvette for whatever reason at speed 4. He's just charging right at the onager just because he can. The onager somehow could go last, and so he then moves ahead at speed, we'll say speed 2. Okay, perfect. All right. Or actually, yeah, no, this is fine. All right. So then, at the end of the ship's activation, I believe, is that what it said? At the end of a ship's activation, yes. Okay. So the standard onager with no upgrades, the standard range it can place is its ignition token is within close range. Now you do have the option. You don't have to place the ignition token. It is a may effect, meaning maybe for example, if these ships were way out of position, maybe you don't want to put down an ignition token. It's not going to give you any benefit, or whatever is the reason. You don't have to place it down if you don't want to. Okay. All right. So now you place down your ignition token. As you see here, it has to be within close range, or whatever the range band that you can place it at. They can never straddle the lines of the range. They can only be, for example, completely within close. One upgrade is within medium. One upgrade is within long. Now, depending on your upgrade card, for example, one gives you ignition long, and along with your standard ignition close, meaning you could place this token within ignition long or ignition close, but you wouldn't be able to straddle it at any part into medium. Again, they're specifically saying, hey, it has to be within long, has to be within close, or if you've got the other upgrade, that's only within close or only within medium. Okay? All right. So now we've got this token here. We're going to go ahead and say that he's got the ability to place the token at ignition long. So we're going to go ahead and throw this token right here at long. Perfect. All right. Now it's the start of the next turn. The onager is going to activate. You check to see, hey, is there any ships that are in the ignition arc? Yes. Okay. You have to make an attack against a ship if it is in the ignition arc and you have an ignition token down. You can never choose to not do this. The rules do not allow for that. And also keep in mind that, like, when you're doing these attacks and things like that, ignition attack is just like any other attack, meaning upgrade cards come into play, damage cards, commanders, effects, other abilities, etc. You can add dice to this attack. I do want to point out real quick that with ignition attacks, even if, for example, even if I was making an ignition attack at close range, you cannot salvo an ignition attack. It doesn't matter that I'm standing right next to you and you can pretty much just come out and smack me in the face with your space hand. If I make an ignition attack, you can't salvo attack back, because that's what salvo says. You can't do it. All right, want to make sure I was covering that real quick. All right. So we see here, this is these dashed lines are the special ignition arc coming out. So for example, I can shoot both of these ships right now so far because they're within my firing arcs. The first thing I check for is, are they within arc? Yes. Secondly, what is the line of sight to my targets? What can I see? Well, I can range line of sight from front to front here. I could range line of sight from front. Nope, can't see the side there. And then I range line of sight from front to front there. And can I see line of sight to the side? No. So that's the first thing you check for. Is the first thing you do is you measure, are you within the firing arc of the ignition, and then what line of sight do you have to which hull zones you can attempt to attack. Then you're also checking what range are you at. Are you at close range, medium range, long range, or extreme range, and you measure that range from the onager itself to start with. Okay, these are all checks you make to start with. Why is that important? Because that depends vastly on how the evade defense token can be used. Because the evade token recently just got an errata. It says while defending at extreme range, the standard effective evade defense token cancels 2 dice of the defender's choice. Because the evade otherwise at long range only cancel 1 dice, where they're saying, well, you know, we need to make a ruling that it can evade 2 dice at extreme range, because obviously it's further away, so it should have double the effect. Makes sense to me. Okay. So that means, for example, let's go ahead and move this CR90 at extreme range. So the first thing you do is you take your measuring stick. It's still an attack, so you're ranging from cardboard to cardboard still. Okay, so I'm measuring from here to here. Okay, that's cardboard to cardboard. That's that long range. Okay, now I'm going to take my measuring stick. I'm ranging from cardboard. He's not at long range. This one's at extreme range. Okay. Now, how do you know which dice in the ignition battery armament that you use? In this case, we've got 4 red and 3 black. So now you finally check the range from the token. Are the ships at close, medium, or long range of the token? In this case, they are both at close range of the token, meaning that you would use the dice associated with the range of that token. In this case, it's being at close. You can use the 4 red and 3 black. If there's blue dice, essentially it's the same thing as, are they at close range? You use black dice, blue dice, and red dice. If it's at medium range, you can only use blue dice and red dice. If it's at long range, you can only use red dice. Now, one thing I do want to point out is, as it mentioned in here, it doesn't matter how the range, it doesn't need to go to the arc or the hull zone you're actually shooting, like with a standard attack. So you could have something like this, for example. You see here, even though you're ranging and shooting from the front, and that's technically close range from the onager ship itself, when you check range, you're checking is it at close range? Yes. Okay, I get to use the black and red dice. But in some instances, for example, if this CR90 was not at close range of the ignition token, obviously it's at close range of your ship. Guess what? You don't get the black dice in your ignition attack. You only get the red dice. Because again, as it states, you only use the dice associated with the range of the ignition. You might think, like, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, yeah, yes, it does, because otherwise then there is no drawback to ever not putting out an ignition token. Now, in this case, is if somebody manages to bamboozle you and get out of the close range of the token, even though they're at close range of you, you neutered the black dice out of the die pool for the ignition, and they're only throwing red dice at you now instead of the reds and the blacks. And that's how that works. So keep that in mind. Again, same thing. For example, if this Corvette, let's give the opposite example again. So let's see here. Again, I just want to make sure I'm giving plenty of examples for this, because people are absolutely going to have questions about it. So we're going to say something like this, where, okay, the special ignition arc, here we are, is, we'll say that, let's see here. There we are. So we see there the special ignition arc is barely getting to the front. We can see here that when he measures from the physical ship token to the CR90, it's not at long range, it's at extreme range, but he can only see the front and maybe the side. So he could target either. But when you're ranging from the token itself, you'll see there, even though it's only getting the rear part of the cardboard on the CR90, that still counts as you being able to use the close range dice of the ignition dice. Because again, that's what it says in here. Let's see here. Dice are gathered from the attacker's special battery armament based on the range measured from the attacker's targeting token. to any part of the defender's ship token, even in another hull zone, instead of the attack range. So again, plastic doesn't count. You can't measure from the token to plastic because, again, this is still technically attack. You need to measure to cardboard, even from the token. Okay. I think I have covered some of those aspects, but just for the fun of it, we're now going to shoot at this CR90 just so you can see how extreme range works. And yeah, we'll just go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to shoot the front. So front to front, we are at close range of the ignition token. So I'm going to throw those 4 reds and those 3 blacks. Hey, that's a pretty good roll. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to accuracy the redirect. And the CR90 is like, oh, big ouch time is coming. I'm going to go ahead and use my evade. And instead of canceling 1 dice at long range, I can cancel 2 dice at extreme range. You know what? I hate the double hit there, and I hate one of the crits there. So it went from being, I managed to get rid of 3 damage, so half the damage in the attack pool. Now there's only 3 more damage coming at me, but uh-oh, my redirect's locked. I still lose 2 shields off the front, and I take a face-up damage card from that attack. Now, this definitely can get worse once you start considering dice modifications, intel officer, essentially the more firepower you can throw, especially at smalls. You know, it's a lot of damage for them to take before they even get anywhere near the onager to even start shooting back. And then consider that the onager has a salvo token. You know, if you want to shoot from the front of the CR90 that no longer has any shields, well, it's going to salvo back and then start plinking damage back in that way too. So that's very dangerous for the poor little CR90s. All right. So then you've made your ignition attack. Now you remove the token from the play area. That's your attack. So now, even though it is still that onager's activation, it's used its attack associated with the front hull zone, even though this MC-75 is at long range, and I could use my battery armament of at least 1 red die of the test bed version to, you know, I've already used my 1 attack from that hull zone. I can't attack that MC-75 again unless I have gunnery teams equipped. If I do have gunnery teams equipped, I could then choose to attack with my regular front arc on the MC-75. I honestly don't see a whole lot of value of gunnery teams on the onager, mainly just because, you know, you really want to beef up how powerful you can get that ignition shot. It's not really meant to be a frontline fighting ship unless you kit it drastically different than what it's made to be. But anyway, that is pretty much the standard ignition attack and how the attack dice are gathered. Again, how you're measuring line of sight. So again, pretty much, again, just to run through it real quick. I know I keep saying this one more time. The first thing you do is you find out if it's at close, medium, or long, or beyond, or at extreme range from the ship itself. That's the first thing you check. The second thing you check is then, what is line of sight? What line of sight to which hull zones can I shoot? Then or second, third, etc. Then, you know, you need to check to make sure, is it within firing arc? Is it in or out of arc? You know, and when this arc, by the way, doesn't just stop here, it goes, you know, to infinity and beyond. You know, it's Toy Story, everybody. So that is the actual how far that range goes out. Because again, this is all extreme range out here. Okay. Hopefully you guys have been following me so far. Again, as you watch the video, if you have questions, don't wait until the end because you won't remember. Just post them as you watch. And then if it's answered as you are watching, just delete it. If it's still there by the time you finish it and it still doesn't make sense, leave it. I'll answer it. Okay? All right. Some people have been saying, oh yeah, I love Director Krennic with Ignition. No. Again, Director Krennic is very specific. While attacking at medium to long range. Okay? Medium to long range. He does not work at extreme range. I mean, I guess you could put him on the onager and then use them when they do get to actual physical long range. Some people have found value in that. I personally don't feel like that is as important. I'd rather take other kinds of modification. But some people have gotten use of Krennic. Again, he doesn't work at extreme range. It only works when the ship is physically at long range. One more thing I want to make sure I'm pointing out because I almost forgot. And this is something that I got caught up on, and I initially was like, no, that doesn't make any sense. But then we talked through it, and it's like, oh yeah, that I was wrong. I can see that I was incorrect. So some people are going to argue this point. I want to make sure I'm stamping it out right now. What is considered at long range for determining if it's at long range or extreme range? So initially, I thought that okay, when I was measuring from the onager to my target, even though I wasn't, as you can see here, I'm not hitting cardboard, but I still was hitting the plastic of the ship. Well, remember when you're doing range checks for other things like comnets and other card abilities, etc., if you hit from plastic to plastic, that ship was considered, at long range or distance 1 to 5 or what have you. And so I thought, oh, that ship's at long range. But then Dre's Nida very smartly pointed out, he's like, no, you're not quite understanding. You're still measuring attack range. It still needs to be cardboard to cardboard. Even though you can touch that ship with the range ruler from plastic to plastic, and that might be considered at long range or distance 1 to 5 for some card abilities, what you're doing is still technically ranging for an attack. It needs to be cardboard to cardboard. Okay? So that's how you determine if it is at long or beyond long. So not just getting just the tip of the plastic is enough. You need to be able to get the cardboard in there as well. All right, want to make sure I covered that before I forgot. All right, move this shit back. Okay. All right, covered Krennic. Let's cover Solar Corona real quick. Does Solar Corona affect the ignition arc? Yes. And which arc does it affect when you're making this attack? Does it affect only the front hull arc or the ignition arc? It is the front hull arc because the ignition arc is considered part of the front hull arc. It just has its own special firing arcs within that arc. Meaning if the Solar Corona was on this side of the map, when you do your line of sight check, guess what? It is hitting the solar. So if you rolled, for example, if I had that initial this attack pool on my initial attack pool roll, I would have immediately lost the accuracy from that attack because of solar. And again, it's associated with the front hull arc, not just the special firing arc. Okay? All right. Want to make sure I was covering that. Perfect. Okay, let's start talking about some of the ignition upgrades real quick. I'm not going to cover these cards in terms of their upgrades and what they do, this, that, and the other thing. It's mainly just to cover, again, how they're interacting with ignition real quick. So we've got Cataclysm, which is a title for the Onager, which states at the start of the ship phase, you may spend a concentrate fire token to place your targeting token within your special firing arc within the range specified by one of your ignition keywords. So for example, if you've got Cataclysm equipped and orbital bombardment particle cannons, which allows you to place an ignition token at long, you could at the start of the ship phase say, hey, I'm spending a concentrate fire token. My ship is going to go ahead and place the ignition token down to start with. Boom. That way, you aren't having to wait till the end of the ship's activation to place it. You can place it at the start of the ship phase. A lot of people like to try to deploy the Onager last, so that way they can line up the perfect shot with Cataclysm and the orbital bombardment cannons, so that way they already have a range to shoot at targets. So for example, if this Onager was already at distance 3 of the deployment edge, and for example, we'll say this MC-75 was deployed straight across from it, if you use Cataclysm, you can throw that token down like this right in front of there within long range. And as you can see, you can already attack that MC-75. And that MC-75, it doesn't matter what it does, it cannot escape the special firing arcs. I have never seen a large base be able to escape the ignition attack at long range. Obviously, if he just trundles, at speed 3 or speed 2, you can get within close range, and then he's going to start getting blasted, and he's going to have a very bad time. Even if the ship was to deploy on the back line, say back here, you can see here, still in range regardless. So pretty much, large bases are going to have a really hard time not getting shot at if they get out deployed. All right, want to make sure I cover Cataclysm. And then the token is removed, again, after you make your addition attack. And then, Cataclysm, most people bring it and they only ever typically use it the one time. Although in some cases I've seen people not place it after an onager is moved because they want to trick an opponent to see if they'll take it. It's like, oh, he didn't place the target token down. It's safe to go back into the water. And then they'll get into the front arc of the onager and they'll have something like Hondo or something like, oh, here's the ignition token and pow, pow, pow. And yeah. So, there's a few ways to trigger that if you want to. All right. The only other upgrade for the super weapon that changes where you can place the ignition token is the super heavy composite beam turbolasers. Man, these cards are so wordy. This one allows you to place at medium instead of long. So, medium range being here instead of at long or at close range. All right. I think I covered everything ignition related. Although if you've seen something that I haven't covered, or if you think I got something wrong, please be sure to point it out. Let me know. Pretty much, again, one last time for those in the back, you start the checking how ignition works is you start with your check from the ship. Is it within firing arc? Yes, this ship is within the firing arc that I need it to be in. Perfect. What range is it at? You take your physical ruler, you chuck it out there, if I can grab it. You chuck it out there. Ah, he is beyond long. He's not at long range. He is at extreme range, okay? Then you measure line of sight. What hull arcs can I shoot? Ah, I can only shoot his front hull arc, okay? Now, where is my ignition token range, okay? He's not at close. He's not at medium, so I can't use the dice pools at those ranges. Ah, but he is at long range from this token. So I can use the special ignition battery armament of my red dice when attacking that ship. And that is essentially, again, ignition in a nutshell. So leave comments. Let me know if you have a request for future cards I should cover from the new waves, or again, just anything else. You guys are all fantastic. Appreciate your patience. And hey, I'll catch you all next time.